Good afternoon, Australia. This is Shirley from Tourism Authority of Thailand, Australia, bringing Thai wellness into your home. Welcome to our Restore, Refresh, Renew by Amazing Thailand. Our topic today is popular diets. Are they right for you? Maybe you have decided to clean up your diet to feel better or just to feel healthier. But there are so many diet trends out there. Which one would be the best for you? We are very privileged to be accompanied by the head of naturopath, research and development specialist from Chiva-Som Wellness Center located in Hua Hin. Dr. Tal Friedman. Welcome, Dr. Friedman. Would you mind sharing your insightful knowledge from warm Hua Hin?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, I'm super happy to share today. So let me get my screens shared. So I think everybody can see my slides. So yeah, thanks again. Today I'll be talking about some popular diet trends, popular diets that are out there. This is a topic that I do like to talk about as when I see guests here at the resort in Hua Hin. I get asked a lot of different questions about popular diets. So I'll go through a couple of the more popular ones. I'll be talking about the paleo diet. I'll be talking about the keto or ketogenic diet. And I'll talk a little bit about fasting. I'll talk a little bit about kind of the origins of the diets, how they kind of got popular, some criticisms, and then how I think they could apply to you, maybe. So yeah, let's go through that together. So let's start with the paleo diet. The paleo diet actually has a pretty decently long history, even all the way back to the 1800s with Harvey Kellogg, who is the guy behind Kellogg's cereal. He spoke about kind of eating ancestrally, but really the paleo diet came to be popular, or rose to popularity in the 1970s with a guy named Dr. Voegelin. He wrote a book called The Stone Age Diet, where he really kind of championed this ancestral eating idea. However, a lot of the more recent kind of paleo diet people really separated from this guy because he was a white supremacist and had all kinds of really strange ties to all kinds of strange things. But really the kind of paleo diet I think that most people know about today really rose to popularity with a guy named Loren Cordain, who wrote a book called The Paleo Diet. And these days, the paleo diet industry is worth $500 million worldwide. And you can see the picture on the right side of the screen here. There's a whole kind of cottage industry built around the paleo diet. So what is the paleo diet? Really, the paleo diet boils down to no processed food, no grains, no dairy, no sugar, no legumes, no processed oils, and no fatty or cured meats. The idea is that 10,000 years ago, the human civilization didn't have a lot of these types of foods available. So we're not eating the way that our bodies are kind of designed to eat. That's the real core of what the paleo diet is about. It really emphasizes meat, proteins, veggies, and fruits above everything else. So having said that, there's a pretty decent amount of criticism that you could aim at the paleo diet. A lot of people like to kind of tote that the paleo diet's good for specific conditions or even weight loss, but a lot of the big scientific studies that have been done on the paleo diet are quite poor in quality. They tend to be kind of small, or they're not controlled very well. So I'd say the science kind of behind the paleo diet is a little bit wishy-washy. But the biggest kind of criticism that I have against the paleo diet is that ancestral diets, or the hunter-gatherer diets that it's kind of aiming to try to reproduce, are different all over the world. If you take a look at the map here on the right, there's still kind of pockets of ancestral communities kind of scattered all over the world, and their diets are completely different from one another. So kind of depending on your ancestral lineage, your hunter-gatherer ancestral diet could be radically different than other people's. If you take a look at the Inuits from northern Canada, like the northernmost parts of Canada, their diets are nearly like 90% fat, really super high fat diets because they eat a lot of whale blubber. But if you look at Kitavans, which are from kind of sub-Saharan Africa, if I'm not mistaken, their diets are mostly starch. So they actually eat a lot of like potatoes and root vegetables and drink tons and tons and tons of milk. So to say that you're trying to emulate a hunter-gatherer diet or an ancestral diet, I kind of don't buy into that. So that's probably the largest criticism that there is behind the paleo diet. So kind of overall, thoughts about the paleo diet? Removing processed foods is always a good idea. Using healthier oils is also a great choice, like all of the time, basically. Relying on kind of packaged paleo foods are really silly. And if you take a look at this picture, this is from a blog making paleo desserts. And if you take a look at the nutritional information behind some of these paleo desserts, they can be even worse than the standard desserts they're trying to emulate. Something I always say to guests is, brownie is usually still a brownie. Doesn't really matter if it's a keto brownie or a paleo brownie. So that's kind of my thoughts really quickly about the paleo diet. And we'll kind of segue into the ketogenic diet or the keto diet. This I've been asked a lot about lately, so I'd like to get into it a little bit. The most interesting thing about the keto diet is the origins of it. So in the 1920s, a lot of studies were done on people with diabetes, actually, and they found that people on very low carbohydrate diets or people that are fasting have something called ketone bodies in their blood, which is like a byproduct of fat metabolism. So it means you're metabolizing a lot of fat and you're using that for energy. And they found that people with high amounts of ketones in their blood and people that are fasting or on low carbohydrate diets have a lot less seizures, actually. So the seizure threshold goes down. So in the 1920s, the ketogenic diet was actually medically prescribed to people with epilepsy because it really super improved their seizure control and the number of seizures that they would have overall. The keto diet kind of lost popularity in the 40s as the rise of good quality anti-seizure medications kind of increased. The two drugs, Dilantin and phenytoin, kind of grew to popularity kind of in the mid 40s. So the diet kind of lost popularity. It gained popularity again in the 1960s because you were able to buy MCT oil. You might have heard of MCT oil. It's a type of oil where if you ingest a lot of this kind of oil, it can help put you in a state where you're burning more fat because you're using this oil for energy. So that can improve seizure control in people who have a hard time sticking to a keto diet. So it kind of gained popularity again a little bit and then kind of faded off because there are side effects that drinking that much MCT oil, which has to do with kind of stomach upset and digestive upset. So again, kind of lost popularity. And then it kicked up again a little bit again in the 1980s with the Atkins diet. Now the Atkins diet isn't, I would say, a true keto diet. It's a lower carbohydrate diet, but a true keto diet, and I think this is what most people maybe misunderstand a little bit about what a keto diet is that it's a very high fat, moderate to low protein diet. It's very different than just a low carbohydrate diet. A keto diet, again, is a very high fat diet. You're trying to get about a 4-to-1 ratio of fat to protein. Not all low carb diets are the same. That's a big point. So what is ketosis? What's the point of doing this keto diet thing? Ketosis, or the state that you're trying to be in when you're doing a keto diet, is a state where your body is mainly using fat for energy. This fat can be some stored body fat, but typically it's fat from the diet. So if I shift my diet from, like a standard diet where I'm eating a variety of different foods and I get a, pretty decent amount of carbohydrate in, carbohydrates are really easy to use for energy, and our body really likes using them for energy. Easy to use. So when I'm eating carbs, my body is really good at burning carbs. If I remove all the carbs and I start pumping my body full of fat, I start eating a lot of fat or drinking a lot of fat, like the MCT oil I mentioned. Our body starts trying to adapt to that and burning fat for energy. The byproduct of this burning is these ketone bodies that show up in the blood. We can use those for energy. Too much of the ketones can be a bad thing. But generally speaking, if you're a healthy person, totally fine. So something to take note of is that this transfer from using mainly carbohydrates for energy to mainly fats for energy can take a couple of days. It's not just like an on-off switch where you're like, all right, I'm doing a keto diet, and you're immediately just burning fat for energy. It takes a few days. And if after those few days you eat a big bunch of carbohydrates, it kind of kicks you out of that process and you have to start again. That's something important to note, because that ends up being one of the biggest downsides. So yeah, the biggest downside is that it's really easy to get kicked out of this fat burning state that you can be in with a keto diet. Something that a lot of people do is they'll buy something called keto sticks, which if you do decide to do a keto diet, I do recommend you pick up. You can get them at almost every pharmacy anywhere in the world. And it's just a little stick, and you test it with your urine, and it tells you whether or not your body is in ketosis, if you have ketones in your pee or in your blood. So easiest way to make sure you're actually in ketosis. I would say my other biggest criticism about the keto diet is that it's extremely restrictive. If you take a look at the pictures here on the right, if you look at the bottom right-hand corner, that's what a ketogenic meal really looks like. I think a lot of people think it looks like the low-carb meal, but to really be in ketosis and to really be burning just fat for energy, the diet needs to be fairly moderate to low in protein and really high in fat. It's very restrictive. It's not easy to do. Some people can thrive on it, but it's pretty tough. The other big thing to make note of is that if you have stomach issues, if you have IBS, keto diets can make symptoms of IBS worse for a lot of people. It's a little bit fiber restrictive, and if you have issues digesting that much fat, you'll notice that you get really bloated and start leaning towards constipation really, really easily on a keto diet. So I would say those are the biggest cons with a keto diet. So kind of overall, my thoughts. Again, keto desserts, I always find it hilarious looking through them. They tend to be really high calorie because they're just full of fats and oils and butters, which is not necessarily a bad thing. But again, a brownie is a brownie. Don't think just because it's paleo or keto, it's a healthy brownie. It's still a brownie. Now, ketogenic diets, I will sometimes recommend as a very short-term kind of diet. So if you have a very specific goal, and maybe it's a metabolic issue, it's a blood pressure thing, it's a blood sugar thing, whatever it is, I may recommend it for a short period of time to kind of kickstart a process of change. Maybe I want to make some changes on some blood tests or something that you notice really quickly, and then you transition to kind of a more maintenance diet approach that isn't as restrictive and doesn't come with as many downsides. So as a short-term thing, I might recommend a keto diet. The other big thing that I mentioned before is neurological issues, especially epilepsy or any condition where your threshold for having a seizure becomes really low, because it works really well actually for epilepsy control, seizure control. And then the last thing, if you do decide to do a keto diet, you need to make sure you get all your nutrients in. You need to eat lots of veg. make sure you're not deficient in anything. And if you think you are, supplements might be needed in that case. That's kind of my overall quick takes on keto diets. Now, intermittent fasting. I'm going to start by saying this isn't really a diet, as we're not talking about what to eat, but rather we're talking about when we're eating. It's really gotten very popular over, I'd say, over the last year or two. Although I've been kind of interested in reading about fasting and intermittent fasting for a number of years. So I'm super happy to discuss it with more people on a regular basis. So the origins of fasting are as old as time itself, I guess. It's been a traditional or religious practice for numerous years. And actually, a lot of the really, let's call it base research, comes from religious practices like Ramadan or other religious fasts. Therapeutic fasting or medically recommended fasting really started in the 1910s. The basis of the research is very, very similar to what we just spoke about in the keto diet, right? If you're fasting, your body starts tapping into stored fat pretty quickly for energy. So you get that same ketones showing up in the blood that you do with the keto diet. Doesn't last forever because we only have so much fat, but the same kind of benefits neurologically for seizure control and epilepsy are there. And it was also used for cases of morbid obesity, kind of starting in the 1910s-ish, 1920s. And there was a few really notable case studies in the 1960s. I do recall that there was one case of a man who weighed hundreds and hundreds of pounds and was able to go, I think, completely without food for about 14 days with basically no side effects. But this is morbidly obese people, right? Not normal cases. But the medical community was really taking a look at fasting closely in and around the 1960s. In popular culture, I think it really got popular in 2012-ish, where there was a BBC special that kind of went around the world. And I know book sales that were related to the book were big in the UK and Australia. The guy's name is Michael Mosley, and he wrote a book called The 5-2 Diet, which was 5 days of very, very low calorie eating and then 2 normal eating days a week. So kind of fasting. I'll talk a little bit about that, but the other types of fasting kind of really kicked up popularity a couple of years after that. But I would say that 2012 and the 5-2 diet really is what kicks the mainstream talk about fasting. From the medical community, again, kind of 2018 and onwards, there's been a big bulk of research that's come out looking at different methods of fasting, different types of fasting, and the potential health benefits around fasting. And I think that's, for me personally, where it gets the most interesting. So one of the most interesting ways that we know to improve longevity and kind of overall life quality, especially in later stages in life, is calorie restriction. And that's been known for a long time. And there are people out there that restrict their daily calorie intake and control for every nutrient really, really, really carefully. If you Google something called CRON, C-R-O-N, calorie restriction optimum nutrition, there are these communities of people that eat this way because it does extend life, but it's probably one of the most restrictive types of eating out there. But this group of people has been researched really, really, really well. And we know a lot about what's happening biologically in these groups of people. And there's certain genes that get, I don't want to say turned on, but upregulated. Kind of like if I have a volume knob, I kind of crank the volume on these genes, which promote longevity and healthy aging. What's really interesting is that in cases of intermittent fasting or prolonged fasts or different types of fasts, fast mimicking diets, which we'll talk about, some of these same genes get turned on. And the health benefits there are potentially quite large. So fasting might have more health benefits than any other diet that we spoke about. So kind of main types of fasting that seem to be super popular, although there's more than this, are alternate day fasting, which is exactly what it sounds like. One day you eat normally and then the next day you don't. Or one day you eat a super duper low calorie diet and the next day you eat normally. The other, probably the most popular type of fasting is called time restricted feeding. The most popular version of this is where you eat for 8 hours of the day, like you eat like a normal person, and then 16 hours out of the day, you're not eating at all. You're completely fasted. Probably the most popular one. And then the fast mimicking diet, which has gained a lot of popularity, I'd say, probably in the last year, maybe 2 years, is you're eating about, it's hard to say exactly, everybody's a bit different, but roughly 500 calories a day. There's no time restrictions. And typically it's a lower protein diet. That diet came about, an Italian researcher named Walter Longo was looking at fasting and its effects mainly on longevity as well as different types of cancers, using it as an adjunct for kind of cancer therapies, like alongside traditional kind of cancer treatments. But there's still a whole world there of research that's being done. I would say that the time restricted feeding got to be the most popular because it's the easiest for most people to do, right? If you were already skipping breakfast, you're not eating when you're asleep. If you just kind of push off lunch, that gets you to about 16 hours. So I think with relatively no pain, I think a lot of people adapted to that very, very easily, which is okay in some cases. Now, you can launch a lot of criticisms at intermittent fasting, the biggest one being that it's not about the food, right? The biggest thing you have to understand is that, mom was right. You should be eating vegetables. IFOC, or intermittent fasting on crap, is something I like to throw around a lot. If you are just skipping a couple of meals and then hitting up McDonald's on the way home after work, that's not a very healthy diet. And again, what are your goals for doing this in the first place, right? It's still quite easy to overeat when you're doing intermittent fasting approaches. The other big one, big downside that I always think about is mental health and eating disorders. If anybody even has underlying tendencies for disordered eating of any sort or has mood disorders, I steer away from doing any type of intermittent fasting. The other big one is that for specific medical conditions, so if you have blood pressure issues or blood sugar issues or cardiovascular disease, there's no good solid research or medical evidence that says that fasting is going to fix this thing. So there are downsides to doing it, although I might have sounded really positive talking about fasting. So I'll kind of give my kind of overall. Fasting to me is definitely the most interesting because of the potential health benefits. But you have to think about it as a tool. You need to be able to make it fit into your life, and you need to be focusing on the quality of the food at the same time, right? I like to think about it this way. A lot of people have difficulty sticking to a diet either at work or at home. It's not usually both, it's one or the other. Most people, I think, find it easier to eat well at home if they're eating at home, right? Just make sure you're buying the right stuff and stock your fridge appropriately. It's those, you slept in, you're running to work, you get to work a bit late, so you hit up Starbucks, you get a muffin, everybody's ordering pizza for lunch, so you join in. If an area of your life is where you're making all the wrong choices, fasting takes all the choice away, right? If you're fasting during the day, then it's not what you're going to eat for lunch, it's you're just not eating lunch. So I think that's the reason it got popular, and I kind of back it in that sense. If you can still focus on making quality choices when you are eating. So with that said, is there a diet that I prefer? And you're looking at it. This is the diet that I prefer, right? The basics kind of go like this. Number one is veggies. Always be eating veggies. I like lower carb diets, not necessarily keto, but a lot of people can probably just do with less carbohydrate. Adequate amounts of protein, all of this, all of you, all of me, my skin, my hair, my nails, blood cells, immune cells, they're all made out of protein. And we need protein every day. Hair doesn't stop growing, skin doesn't stop shedding. So we need protein. We're made out of protein, eat some protein. Now, the most important for me is portion control. And that's what this diagram is on the left side of the screen. And I like this because it's using your hand to try to determine kind of how much food should be on your plate at each meal. And I like using hands because my hand works for me. It's relative to my size, and your hand will work for you because it's relative to your size. So really quick, the amount of protein on your plate for each meal, roughly, should be about the size of the palm of your hand and about that thick. So chicken, fish, could be a few eggs. And if you're a guy that's exercising a lot, you double it up. And for women, it's just one serving. Again, depending on your goals, if you want to gain weight, you eat more, less, you eat less. Veggies is about a fist. So a small salad, again, for big guys working out, 2 fists, so a bigger salad, or a bunch of broccoli, whatever. Carbs like rice or bread or dinner rolls or pasta, about a cupped hand. Again, you can double it up. And then a serving of fats, about the size of your thumb. That can be nuts, but if you're cooking with oil, 1 thumb is like just a bit less than a tablespoon-ish, give or take. If you're eating out at a restaurant, don't think about the fat because they're using it to cook your food. And just eyeball your plate. At restaurants, I find usually they give you too much starch. It's a lot of pasta or a lot of rice. So I usually just push some of that aside and I get a small salad. But this is kind of my personal guide to eating well that isn't necessarily a diet. So this portioning makes it fairly calorie controlled, lower in carbohydrate, but not no carbs because you're still eating some, right? That's kind of my preferred diet approach. So I'll go over things really quickly. So paleo, I'm pretty meh about paleo. It's, the idea sounds nice, but none of it really makes sense on paper. Eat less processed foods. If you think some kind of food is bugging you, like grains or dairy or what have you, then just cut it out and see how you feel. Keto, like I said, for short-term use, I think it might be really useful, but long-term, it's really difficult to stay vigilant and stay in a state of ketosis long-term. I think it's very difficult to do. Intermittent fasting, you probably could tell I'm a fan, but it's not really a diet. If you're not focused on eating quality food, you'll still feel like crap and you probably won't get to the goals that you're trying to get to. But as a tool, I think there's some benefit there. And yeah, we'll see what the science says, but I think it's a good tool. And like the portion control thing I just went through, yeah, I'm biased. It kind of borrows a bit from everything, but that's my favorites. It focuses on veggies, decent foods. It's low but not no carb, so definitely my favorite. And the last point that I want to make before finishing up is stress eating. This is the biggest thing that gets in the way of whatever diet you end up deciding to do for whatever reason you decide to do a diet in the first place. Stress is unavoidable. It's part of our day-to-day lives. There's no way to get around it. I'm not saying all stress is bad, stress makes us perform. Stress is our fight or flight. It's supposed to prepare our body to take an action against something, right? But these days, it seems like the stress is everywhere almost all the time, depending on what's going on. And one of the biggest things that stress does we get this big rush of stress hormones, and stress makes long-term planning very difficult. It kind of does that on purpose. Stress is this fight or flight response, right? Stress is supposed to make you focus on the things that are right in front of your face. It also increases these reward pathways in our brain. So if you can't think about the consequences of what you're doing, you can only think about what's right in front of you, and all your reward pathways in your brain are turned on, then you're thinking about the donut or the snack that's in front of you and not the long-term consequences of you eating that donut, right? So stress management is super important. And my kind of two biggest tips to try to avoid the pitfalls of stress eating is, number one, plan ahead. Most of us know when we're going to screw up, right? I know that if I don't bring in extra something with me to work, then all the delicious snacks that everybody brings in to share in the office, I will absolutely dive into at lunchtime. So I try to keep something healthy-ish around to snack on so I'm not hungry when I get to the office, right? Plan ahead. And number two, remove temptations. So there's a rule in my condo that any food that is inside my condo will get eaten eventually, right? It's like a law of nature. If there's a bag of chips in my cupboard, I will eat that. At some point, it will be gone. So I try to not buy any kind of big size or bulk size snacks. And I never go to a grocery store when I'm hungry, because everything ends up looking delicious at the grocery store, right? So even if it's a worse deal to buy the smaller bag of chips, even though the large family size option is on sale, I buy the small one because I'll eat a small bag of chips because I want to eat a bag of chips one day, right? But I know that I'm too lazy to go and walk to a convenience store and buy another bag after eating that small one. And if that's the only thing I have in my condo, then that's all the snacking I can do. So plan ahead, because most of us know where we'll slip up, and remove as much temptation as possible. And those are kind of the best things that you can do to make sure that you stay on track for whatever diet you choose to attempt. And so with that comes to the end. I just want to say thanks very much for joining today. I hope that you guys got a lot out of it. I always love talking about this stuff, and I look forward to seeing you all, hopefully in person one day soon here at Chiva-Som here in Hua Hin, Thailand.